During this time period, there is an expansion of railroad transportation throughout the nation, which became increasingly important for all aspects of society. People had begun to rely on railroads, and this is when the economy began to change. Some people say that these changes were for the best, but others suggest that it only led for more problems for our nation. Railroads were once portrayed as an honest business. That began to change when people began to realize that railroads were charging a cheaper rate to large shipment carriers compared to the cost of smaller shipments being made. It wasn't until 1887, when President Cleveland signed the Interstate Commerce Act, that people could begin to question the violations upon this act. Cleveland also played a lead role in fighting the high tariff. He believed that these tariffs were once used for the common good. But after Republicans took office, they falsely used them, and this is what led to the cost of high living and increasing the development of trusts. Trust played a significant role in all the nation, but it wasn't until Harrison became president that a bill was finally passed to protect established businesses and to promote smaller businesses. This act is known as the McKinley Tariff Bill. This bill led to an increase in prices, people's hatred of trust began to grow, and left many people unsatisfied. This is when people realized that things needed to be changed. These unfair regulations eventually led to the Grangers was a farmers' organization that formed in 1867. They believed that they were being discriminated against when it came to the regulations of the railroads. Not all farmers favored this movement because railroads were not in this area yet. They felt that this could decrease new railroad investment. In 1869 to 1875, Granger state laws were established for rates and practices of the railroads. Railroads were very upset by this and immediately took action. They presented lawsuits against these newly enforced laws. They felt that this was a violation as their right as an American citizen under the 14th Amendment. Lawyers at this time were stating that this state regulation was going against what the national government put into place under the Constitution. The Granger cases were finally brought to a Supreme Court in 1876. They take in favor for the farmers, opposed to the corporations. Railroads were becoming more essential for farmers, and the Supreme Court understood. They came to the conclusion that only Congress could regulate interstate trade.
This was one of the Granger cases. This began with the farmers in 1870 wanting an official agreement when it came to the storage of their grain. This law was enacted. Mudd and Scott, the warehouse for farmers' grains, were found guilty for violating this law in 1872. They took this case to the Supreme Court, but it didn't get heard until 1877 with a 7-2 vote against Illinois. The Supreme Court voted that the Illinois law was in violation of the 14th Amendment. This case permitted states to control businesses within their state. This was an extreme help to the growth of federal government regulation. Another well-known case that was brought under the Supreme Court's attention was the Wabash case in 1886. The Wabash case. The court had to determine if states had the right to control railroad rates within their borders. The Wabash did not take away all the states' power to control railroads, but it did protect the federal power's ability to control the shipment between states. Following this case, Congress finally established the Interstate Commerce Commission. Wabash started the movement of a national government to take responsibility of certain affairs that they were assigned previously to the states.
The Interstate Commerce Act. Congress created this act because states could no longer control their railroads. The Interstate Commerce Act made railroads charge their customers public daily rates. This brought up the problem of railroad monopolies, and it was a solution to a set of procedure regulating how railroads do business. Later, this act became a law with the help of both Republican and Democrat parties and other political groups around the country. It required fair rate changes and prohibited special rates for individual shipments.
This act led to the Interstate Commerce Commission, which was very important because it helped search for violators who were against the Interstate Commerce Act.
In the year of 1890, the Sherman Antitrust Act was passed by Congress and signed for approval by President Benjamin Harrison, July 20th, 1989. It was passed to prohibit businesses from eliminating competition of other industries by forming trusts. If you were to violate the act, a fine of $5,000 and imprisonment for 1 year were the highest penalties. The act was created by Senator John Sherman, who was an Ohio Republican, chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, and one of Rockefeller's former business colleagues. Sherman said, to protect the consumers by preventing arrangements designed or which tend to advance the cost of goods to the consumer, meaning that basically it was a law on competition of businesses and benefiting the consumers rather than the competitors. One problem with the act was that the definition of a trust was not very clear. The Sherman Antitrust Act was the first antitrust act which helped but was not very successful during the Gilded Age.
Collective bargaining is when the employers and employees come to an agreement about working conditions. It normally involves a trade union of employees. Some negotiations may include wages, hours, and training. Collective bargaining may occur between a single business owner or an entire industry. It was first used in 1891 by Beatrice Webb, but occurred in the early 1800s as well. The term was first coined by a British historian, Mrs. Sidney Webb. Shortly after the National Railroad Act and National Labor Relations Act were put into place, they allowed all employees to join a union. International protection was ensured due to the Article 23, which allows workers to organize trade unions as a basic right. The Knights of Labor were founded in 1869 by Uriah Stevens. This union was open to the working class, not including bankers, lawyers, stockbrokers, doctors, or liquor manufacturers. Their first union attempt was women on a national scale. The Knights of Labor grew to 700,000 when Terence Powderly took over. However, this union soon declined due to the formation of the American Federation of Labor in 1886. The Knights of Labor held boycotts and strikes such as the Union Pacific and Wabash Railroad, which were both won. The Haymarket riot lost the Knights of Labor their pride and honor. The famous saying of this union was, "An injury to one is a concern for all," showing that they were truly united together. The American Federation of Labor was one of the first federations of unions in the United States. It was founded in Columbus, Ohio in May of 1886, and Samuel Gompers was president. This union emerged from conflict with the Knights of Labor. The AFL made an alliance with craft unions against the Knights of Labor. In World War I, the unions were given protection. However, the Great Depression was a very hard time for labor unions. The AFL stayed close to Democrats in large towns in the 1940s, and in 1955 the AFL emerged with the Congress of Industrial Organizations to form the AFL-CIO. The AFL gained their supporters through the press. In the first few years, anyone was admitted, but it soon became only skilled workers and mostly white men. The AFL allowed segregation and opposed unrestricted immigration because they thought it would flood the market and lower wages. The International Ladies Garment Workers were a union of primarily females founded in 1900 in New York City by 7 local unions. The famous uprising was the Uprising of 20,000, which lasted 14 weeks in front of Triangular Shirtwaist Factory. Women and immigrants were affected the most by this. They improved wages, working conditions, and fair hours, but were not recognized as a union. In 1910, the Great Revolt was held and ended in an agreement called the Protocol of Peace, which allowed higher wages and health benefits. One of the early reformers in their reaction was Thomas Nast.
People may know him as the father of the American cartoon.
These famous cartoons led him to bring down William Tweed, an American politician who is known for his manipulative character known as Boss Tweed. William Tweed was arrested and guilty of corruption for paying his employees insufficient amounts. Thomas Nast wanted the people to know of Tweed's reactions.
This is one of Nast's most influential cartoons of Tweed that depicts how money can corrupt a person's mind, which can lead to political corruption. This is another cartoon of Nast's view on Tweed as he controls the ballot. Boss Tweed is commonly known for his use in block voting. This is a procedure where members vote in blocks according to their size. It is when a block first decides how to cast the votes, and then all of them are cast in favor of the largest opinion within the block. There are rumors that bosses in large companies demanded that their employees voted as a block. This is how large companies managed to stay on top during this time period.
Tweed tried to bribe Nast for $100,000 and was arrested in 1873 because of fraud.
Nat's cartoons also supported Chinese Americans and Native Americans. He helped Grant win the election by helping him make fun of his running mate. Thomas was known as a devoted Republican who opposed inflation of currency. Jane Addams was a well-known women's rights activist. Her most prestigious work was opening and maintaining of the Hall House with Ellen Gates Star in Chicago, Illinois in 1889. It was housed for immigrants and poor citizens. The people that stayed there were required to pay some rent as well as contributing to services around the house. The house expanded over many years. The house included as much as a gymnasium, a nursery, a post office, and a library. For her charitable works during Reconstruction, she was the first American woman to be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1931.
All in all, the Gilded Age was a time filled with a lot of change. People reacted to this period in many ways through Reformation. Government became involved with the big business monopolies.
This included regulating rates of railroads to benefit daily rates for citizens. Many Supreme Court cases took place to establish reform.
The Sherman Antitrust Act attempted to stop big business owners from forming trusts.
Unions became popular as work conditions became rough. Also, early reformers during the Gilded Age used the press as well as charitable works to accommodate for this time.
Therefore, the contrasting reactions of government workers and reformers helped shape to American industry, some negative, some positive.
Hey,
You!
Watching
us! We!
Oh!
you enjoy
It!